All right, we're back here on SportsLine. We're talking the book Dream Again tonight with the author Matt Litton, kind enough to join us here in studio. And Matt, this is the Isaiah Austin story. And a big part of the Isaiah Austin story now is Marfan syndrome and the end of his career. But let's go back to the beginning because it's a remarkable story too. He's growing up. He is a very big kid. I mean, that's the only way you can say it. He's 7 feet tall in junior high school. He stands out like a sore thumb, but you start to see that maybe he's a pretty good basketball player, and then eye trouble starts to come into his life. How did that adversity affect him, and how did he overcome that to become one of the best players in the country?
When you look at when Isaiah and I started to talk through his life and take a look at his story, I quickly realized that he had been prepared to deal with Marfan's his entire childhood, really. You know, because of Marfan syndrome, Isaiah could never really gain weight, and so he grew to be a 7 foot, you know, nearly 7 feet in the 8th grade. And he's very honest in the book about, you know, how uncomfortable it was. I mean, he couldn't wear regular clothes, and you know, 7th and 8th graders, that's a hard
tough.
time anyway. But the eye issues, and again, that was probably related to Marfan syndrome. When he was 11 years old, he was playing baseball, and he was hit in his right eye, you know, by a pitch, and started to have problems with it, and struggled a little bit with it. And he was becoming a notable player on the national basketball scene. I mean, people were starting to take notice of him because of his height. He was playing basketball in Dallas in the 8th grade, and he went up for a dunk in the warm-ups of a championship game. And when he came down from that dunk, the vision in his right eye went completely red, and it terrified him. And he went home. His parents found a specialist, and he began this series of eye surgeries that would last from 8th grade to his sophomore year. And Isaiah described to me that these eye surgeries were the most painful thing you could imagine. He said it was like having somebody stick thousands of needles in your eye. And he said the recoveries were terrible too. After the surgery, the pain was terrible, and he would have to lie face down in his room for days, weeks on end. And for Isaiah, the other pain of this was missing basketball, because he was a kid who really embraced hard work and embraced the grind of getting better. And so, you know, he goes through these surgeries, and after the 3rd surgery, a week or so after, he goes in for the checkup, and they hear from the doctor, they don't hear good news. He says, you know, it doesn't look like it's going to take. And through these years, his vision was kind of intermittently bad. He wasn't completely blind. And he came home that night as a sophomore, and he told his mom, he said, I can't go through this again. You see, each time they had a surgery, his family would get together and they would pray. You know, this has got to be fixed. And they brought a lot of hope to each surgery. And then each time, you know, they were crushed really by the results. And he told his mom that night, he said, I can't go through this again. And she said something that really, I think, had a huge impact on the way he handled Marfan's and the way he lives today. She said, Isaiah, you have 2 choices with this. She said, I don't understand why God allowed this to happen, but you have 2 choices. She said, you know, you can make this your excuse. You can make this vision your excuse, or you can make it your story, but it's up to you. And to me, you know, a lot of people, Isaiah had the excuse to walk away from basketball. I mean, he was probably ranked in the top 15, 20 in America at the time, but as he lost his vision, he started to struggle with things that you and I take for granted. He had to teach himself how to pour a glass of water. His mom joked that she loved to rearrange the living room furniture, but he had lost his depth perception as he was losing vision in his right eye. And she said, I had to keep the furniture the same so he could navigate the living room until he was comfortable. Even shaking hands was a challenge for him that he had to work through. And so when you think about that, I mean, I played basketball, you know, and shooting with, I don't know guys that can shoot it with 2 eyes as well as Isaiah could with 1. But he embraced this. He embraced this idea of making it his story, and his high school coach, Coach Ray Forsett, told me, he said, you know, after Isaiah's sophomore year, he said he would call me in the summer at 6 a.m. and he would say, hey, get up out of bed, old man, let's go to the gym, let's work. And he said we would be in there as the sun came up, and he said Isaiah would put up thousands of shots and hours, and he said he's never been around anybody that worked with that type of tenacity. And as a former coach, you know, you watch tapes of him playing in high school and in college, and the amazing thing to me, here's this kid with 1 vision only in 1 eye, very little depth perception, unbelievable shooter, but he seemed to understand when he was going to be double teamed. He seemed to know when guys were cutting open the basket, and he even rebounded in a way that, and you know, like Isaiah had told me, he said, I never wanted anyone to know that I had a disability. I wanted to play in a way. And not only that, I think the amazing thing to me, the inspiring thing to me is that he made court vision one of his strengths. When you watched him play, he could see the court better than other people. So he was kind of trained through this adversity in his high school years to deal with what he would face in college with Marfans, I think.
Hard work is the big key to what he did with his basketball career and overcoming, but were there any tips or anything that he found along the way to sort of help him navigate playing with one eye, or was it truly just a repetitions of thousands and thousands of hours along the way?
Yeah, I think it was repetition. I mean, I think he had the will to overcome this, and he certainly had the support. You know, one of the things that Isaiah, and I think he got this from his family, and they truly believe this, is it wasn't just his dream. And you know, when we talk about Isaiah's dream, it was really a vision to him. You know, when Isaiah was 5 years old, he says that he saw himself walking across the stage on draft night. And he really believed that if he put in the hard work, that God would honor that dream. And so, you know, I think as a family and the community of people around this young man, it was a shared dream. It was a shared vision. And so I think they supported him through that.
He obviously wanted to play basketball. How did he end up at Baylor?
Well, he played high school in Dallas, and he was recruited by Kentucky and a lot of the national powers. But he started visiting Baylor as an 8th grader, and faith was very important to him and his family. And if you ever have the opportunity to visit with the Baylor coaches and the staff, it is just an unbelievable. There's an unbelievable sense of family there, and faith. And you know, when I was talking to the coaches about Isaiah's story, there wasn't a coach that at some point during our interview for the book didn't come to tears about what had happened and the way Isaiah had handled it. And so there's a real deep sense of togetherness and family there, and I think it made him feel comfortable. And the other thing, you know, Isaiah's family is very important. He has a younger brother and younger sister, and he wanted them to be able to see him play. And so I think all that kind of led to him going to Baylor.
7-foot guy with a bunch of skills, can really shoot it, great court awareness. He was headed to the NBA after his freshman season at Baylor, and then he hurts his shoulder. How did that affect him at the time? And if that wasn't the story or the chapter right then, does he find out about Marfans then, and is that where the story goes, or how does timing all work out in this?
You know, this is it's a book about basketball. There's some basketball anecdotes, but this is a book about faith. And one of the amazing things to me, you know, Isaiah had kind of a rough freshman year, like a lot of freshmen do, but he learned a lot. When you come from high school and you're always the best player on your team, I think young men have a hard time learning how to accept their role. And, you know, coaches say that there are kids who love to win and there are kids who hate to lose, you know, and I think Isaiah was a kid that really hated to lose. He was that kind of competitor. And so that freshman year was really a time of him growing and learning how to deal with that, and he felt like he was spending 1 year there and would be a certain first-round draft pick. The circumstances of that shoulder injury are so mysterious that I think it's part of the bigger story of Isaiah's faith, because he was working out and it wasn't a physical workout. He literally caught a pass from a coach and tore something in his shoulder. And they went to get the x-rays and they told him, they said, hey, you know, you're going to need surgery. You can't go in the draft. And reports at that point were that he was going to be a sure first-round pick. And so he had to change direction. And I think, you know, when we talk about how he handles adversity, the coaching staff at Baylor did an unbelievable job of taking him in that sophomore year. And I think he learned a lot about leadership. You know, he led his team to the Sweet 16 that year. So it was an incredible year of growth. And it's hard to look at that and say that it was accidental, because if the NBA didn't really, I think you said, begin testing for Marfan syndrome until the 2014 draft. And so if Isaiah's shoulder wouldn't have been mysteriously hurt, he would have gone in the NBA draft and likely would have died playing basketball. So
that is remarkable when you think about it. And he goes back to Baylor and has a terrific sophomore season and just a great career there, and gets set for this 2014 draft, as you mentioned. How did they ultimately detect it? Obviously, it was through a test, and just How stunning was that news just a few days before the draft?
Let me tell you, it was probably 7 days before the NBA draft, and really the 24 hours where Isaiah found out, and the things that were set in motion to tell him in a way that was safe, to bring his people together, because he has so many people that love him that would want to be there. He had been working out for NBA teams coming in his sophomore season. Initially, he was projected as a second-round pick, but then he began to travel and work out for NBA teams. And I think one of the executives told his agent, he said, "Look, this kid shoots the ball better than any guard in the draft. We're really excited about him." And as he continued his workouts, his name began to rise, and his agent was confident that he was going to go mid to late first round. And so Isaiah was flying on a plane back from a workout in LA. And the last conversation that he had with his agent, Dewan, was, "Hey, we're a first-round lock." And so Isaiah was on cloud nine, just really excited, top of the world. This vision, this dream that he'd been working for his entire life was finally going to happen. And the next phone call that his agent received was from the NBA doctors at the NBA Combine. When they bring the guys in to work out at the Combine, they do all kinds of tests. And in 2014, it was the first year that they did genetic testing, and they flagged him for Marfan syndrome. And so his agent received the call that Isaiah would never play again. And he immediately called Isaiah's mother, who was in Kansas City. Isaiah had just flown back to Dallas to go to a Baylor basketball camp and work with kids, which is something that he loves to do. Mm-hmm. And so they called Coach Drew, and it set this whole process in motion. His mom was driving through the night to get there. His high school coach came to spend some time with him and kind of keep him occupied, because their fear was that he was going to hear this over the radio, that they weren't going to be present to talk with him. And really, they decided to do it at his aunt's house in Dallas. His high school coach, Coach Ray, kept him busy. They went and worked out with some NBA guys. It was a real light workout. And they drove up to his aunt's house that night, and Isaiah began to notice that Coach Drew was there, his car was there, that his mom's car was there, and he told me, he said, the news had been so good, I really thought that they were throwing a surprise party. And he said, to me, it was a little early, but he thought maybe we're celebrating the draft. And he walked in the foyer, in the door of his Aunt Evelyn's house, and he looked at his mom's face, and he knew it was terrible news. And I can't do the scene justice unless you read the book, but he literally collapsed to the floor in that moment. And that room was full of the people who had dreamed with him and worked with him and loved him. The entire Baylor coaching staff wanted to be there that night. His friend Corey Jefferson, who plays for the Nets now, was there. And his spiritual mentor, a man named Coach Pops, was in the room that night too. And as the situation became intense, Coach Pops began to sing a gospel song, and then he began to pray. And again, you have to read the scene to really understand it, but that night, I find it remarkable that night, in the worst part of Isaiah's life, really, in this terrible scene, that's where this beautiful idea for Dream Again really began. In this prayer, and in his willingness to get back up off the floor and move on with life.
What an amazing story, and we're going to get to the part where he does dream again and moves on after that, right after this. Stay with us. We're chatting with Matt Litton, the author of Dream Again, the Isaiah Austin story. So stay tuned. More SportsLine right here on News Channel 5 Plus after this.